Welcome to the PinkpillRx podcast, hosted by Katie and Jay Fillmore, where we navigate complex and thought-provoking topics surrounding women with a focus on education. For shorter form content, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at Caters88 or PinkpillRx.
That's KATORS88.
If you enjoy this podcast, please give us a follow and maybe a nice review.
Before we begin, as always, I want to remind our listeners that with the potential TikTok ban on the horizon, you can always find us on YouTube and Instagram. We're committed to keeping our community connected, so just make sure to follow us on those platforms to stay up to date with all of our content. And as a reminder, if you love what we do and want to support our mission, consider joining our Patreon for just $1 a month. The link is in the show notes. Your contribution helps us continue bringing you this content. Also, if you have a story you'd like to share with our listeners and followers, please email us at pinkpillrx@gmail.com. All stories are shared anonymously unless specifically stated that you want your name included. We're also starting an email list that we're going to eventually use for announcements, podcast episodes, new releases, and any kind of updates. We're playing around with the idea of also doing like a fun fact and stats email if there's enough interest. So if you'd like to be included in our emails, please use the link in the show notes to sign up. And as a reminder, we're your hosts, Katie
And Jay
Fillmore, and we are thrilled to have you with us again. How you doing, Jay?
You know, I'm making it.
You want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, it was a rough week. Just family stuff with my extended family, and then stuff with our kids. Our toddler's been pretty sick. You know, it's been a bit of a storm the past 2 weeks?
Yeah, we've been muscling through what I suspect to be RSV in the household. So we've been a little scant online. We've been a little slacking. So we apologize if you've noticed there's been less content. That is the reason why we have been ill.
Sorry, tis the season.
It is the season, unfortunately.
But it's a little bit nice. It's going to be a little bit nicer next week, at least for us in Northern Illinois.
Yep.
Doing some maple tapping.
I tap maple trees. It's one of my many ADHD hobbies.
It is good syrup, though.
It is.
It's really good.
Maple syrup. Listen, you can tap any maple tree. If you have a maple tree, tap it. That's all I have to say.
It's great advice because it's really good.
Yes, so it like drains from the tree, mostly water, and then you boil it down into syrup. It's so easy.
Yes.
Listen, for real, if I can do it, you can do it. Trust me. You're laughing because you know that's true. I am not a homemaker connoisseur, which is why I'm saying if I can do it, you can do it.
Your food's really good.
Well,
Don't save so short. Your sourdough bread? Come on.
Yeah, I have some niches. I'm a niche cook.
A niche cook. That's a cool term. I'm a niche cook. Breakfast. My scrambled eggs, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, he does make amazing scrambled eggs. There's no crusties. If you're
not a single crusty in
if
those
you
suckers.
can't tell, we are a neurodivergent family. What makes eggs good is that there's no crusties.
Yes.
Anyway, speaking of cooking, sometimes I get people that will email me ideas or say things that in the comments that make me think, what? How does this have any connection with each other whatsoever? And this happened to me not too long ago where somebody messaged me and said, talk about how salmonella is the woman's fault. I'm like, what?
Salmonella poisoning? Like
Salmonella? Yes. How is that the woman's fault? That's so then I start looking into it. And dude, there's this concept called housewife responsibility.
Okay.
In relation to salmonella in the United States.
Specifically?
Yes.
Okay.
And it stems from outdated legal reasoning, essentially, and cultural assumptions from 1974, where there was a court case between the American Public Health Association versus Butts is the last name. And it was a case where they argued that housewives or cooks were expected to prevent salmonella infections through proper food handling and cooking practices, implying that contamination was manageable at the consumer level, which relieved some of the responsibility at the production level. However, modern research shows that salmonella prevention is very complex, and contamination often occurs at the production level and processing stages. And even through cleaning or thorough cooking, it may not fully eliminate all the risks. And the biggest risk is the cross-contamination during food preparation. So it's like contamination on other foods and stuff, which is the major cause of infections. But historically, yeah, the USDA's regulation had this cultural norm that was implicitly placed this responsibility on housewives or homemakers, particularly in the context of food safety and household management.
Wow. So do you think, I mean, I didn't read the court case. I don't know what the climate was of the 70s, but it seems like corporations were looking to not get sued and trying to put some of the legal, like the liability on somebody, and they chose wives and mothers as scapegoats.
That's what it sounds like to me, because in the cases of the salmonella contamination, courts assumed that housewives were responsible. And they backed that up, the USDA backed that up by saying that they conducted studies that showed that housewives spent the majority of their time on food preparation, cleaning, and household upkeep, which just reinforces the societal expectation of their role in maintaining a safe and healthy home environment.
Right. You know, I know from my one law class I took in college that there was this shift in the 20th century from buyer beware, like you better vet whatever you buy because it's not, the liability is not on the company that made it or sold it, to gradually being now it's like the producer beware. Like you need to be held accountable for the production of the things that you're selling and things like that. So I wonder where the 70s kind of fell in that transition in the last century.
This is the weird thing though, man. Because in the U.S., food safety regulations really emphasize consumer education. They do hold producers accountable through standards like through the USDA and FDA regulations, you know? Mm-hmm. What's interesting is that in Europe, campaigns target consumers broadly rather than singling out homemakers like the U.S. does. And they emphasize shared responsibility between households and industries. So in Europe, salmonella prevention is not considered the sole responsibility of individuals or housewives. Instead, the EU employs a farm-to-fork approach to food safety, which involves shared accountability across the entire food chain from producers to consumers, where it seems like in the U.S., food safety regulations emphasize consumer education. Even though they do hold producers accountable, it sounds like those regulations are less strict than in Europe.
Interesting. Well, yeah, that seems like a problem for us. It's the woman's fault.
It's the woman's fault, exactly.
She gave to me and I ate.
She gave to me.
Tale as old as time.
It is a tale as old as time. It's biblical, man.
Jeez.
Goodness. I know we've talked about this.
Jerk move.
I know that we've touched on this a couple times, but it just brings it back up to the forefront. And I'd like to spend some extra time on it.
Oh, okay.
We've touched on unpaid labor. Like this is an example of unpaid labor. This labor is put upon the housewife, right? To prevent salmonella.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, with the businesses that have all this money and resources, instead of like, well, it's whoever's making the food in the home's fault, which everybody at the time knew they were talking about women. But you're the one that has all the resources to make the food you're producing more safe.
Exactly.
You got all the money for that, all the connections for that. Anyway, sorry.
Right. And as a reminder, globally, women perform unpaid labor, which is worth approximately $10.9 trillion annually. In the United States alone, if women were paid minimum wage for their unpaid labor, they would have earned about $1.5 trillion annually. Just as a reminder, we've used those figures before. But I would like to dive in more to like, what are we talking about when we're talking about unpaid labor?
Get into it.
And how can we help even out the load here? So in the U.S., women spend an average of 4.5 hours daily on unpaid labor compared to men who spend about 2.8 hours. Even in countries that really emphasize gender equality like Norway, women still do more unpaid labor than men. So unpaid labor limits women's participation in paid work. Okay, so some women are limited severely and aren't able to even enter the workforce because they have so much unpaid labor they have to do. Up to 42% of women complain that they're unable to join the workforce in full due to caregiving, compared to just 6% of men.
That's crazy. 40. So like, let's just say half, just for the sake of making it quick to talk about. So half of women who are eligible to go in the workforce but aren't, say that they can't because of like the work they have to do at home.
Yes,
basically?
or aren't in the workforce at the full of their capacity. So maybe they're part-time,
That's
or
sad.
maybe they have chosen a job that does not require as much from them so that they can do the other duties that they have to do.
That is so sad because, and I don't mean to knock any woman who takes a lot of pride in her work at home, because, different people have different preferences and things. But I will say, like, that is so sad because you're limited in what you can participate in outside the home. So how much self-actualization is actually happening? Like the top of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
Like you're not able to further your career in the way that you want, or get a continuing degree in the way that you want, or pursue a startup as an entrepreneur the way that you want, because you have this ball and chain that ties you to your house. And so just the limiting self-actualization is what is what coming to mind when you're saying that statistic,
Yeah.
You just can't do anything that you want to do that's for you, that's actually going to make you feel more alive.
Let's break down what this labor looks like. You have household management duties like planning meals, grocery shopping, scheduling appointments, managing family calendars and events, organizing those events. With childcare, it's not just childcare. You have helping with homework, arranging play dates, managing school-related activities, making, parent-teacher conferences and band concerts and keeping track of all that stuff. You have the emotional nurturing that's required. They often mediate family conflicts more. They have to remember birthdays more. They typically, and I'm not saying men don't do these things. I'm just saying that this is what the unpaid labor looks like. Maintaining social connections for family events and family relationships and stuff. Often at work, they're the ones organizing team events and special celebrations and stuff. They're often tasked with making sure that they take the meeting notes. They often are tasked with more secretarial duties in meetings, even though that might not be their primary job role. If we zoom in even more on those generalizations, we have cooking, meal preparation, cleaning up afterwards, cleaning the home, including dusting, vacuuming, laundry. We have grocery shopping, managing household supplies, feeding, bathing, dressing children, putting children to bed, helping with homework, school-related activities, emotional nurturing, resolving family conflicts, assisting with medical appointments, medications, personal care, providing emotional support for family members in need, scheduling appointments for family members, managing calendars, budgeting and paying bills often fall on women, organizing family events or holidays. And then this is just I'm just talking about US here. If we talk globally speaking, you then have stuff when you're talking about collecting water, collecting firewood, subsistence farming to support the household and things like that. I mean, if we go global, then that is just massive.
Yeah.
And these tasks are often undervalued because they're seen as natural responsibilities for women.
Right. So it's implicit in a way, culturally too. The secretarial stuff. Let's say there's a meeting with a bunch of, let's just say teachers. Okay. Male, female teachers in a staff meeting. Mm-hmm. And they need someone to take notes for the meeting. I wonder, unless you really just like taking notes, I wonder if more women would volunteer, because there's been subliminal, implicit messaging and kind of priming for that. You know what I mean? You've seen that done. More women have done that from your perspective your whole life, and maybe you're just kind of more geared towards it, not because you like it, but because you've been conditioned for it.
Yeah.
Even though you're not being forced to do it.
We had a shift a while ago. I'm back to doing it now, but we had a shift a while ago where you took over all grocery shopping.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember you being very shocked in what that all entailed.
It seems so simple.
I just got to buy groceries. But what was all the background stuff that you
Dude.
didn't realize needed to be done?
What's hard for me, there are things you need weekly. You need your snacks, you need your meal stuff, but then you have your toiletries, which you may not need every week. It might be every other week or once a month. Then you have your things like your toilet paper and your paper towels and stuff. And it's just stuff falling through the cracks, because if it's not every week and you got to keep track of it, in the back of your mind, I need dishwasher pods. I need paper towels. I need more diaper wipes, and just keeping track of that. And then it seems like I order groceries and we got tons of food, weeks worth of meals and stuff. And then before I know it, I got to order groceries again. And it seems like I just did it 2 days ago.
Yeah, it's like that running inventory in the back of your head. You have to be on alert. You know, when you're in the bathroom brushing teeth, noticing how much toothpaste you have left.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of mental work going on all the time.
Yeah, and then having to remember. Yes.
So glad you took it back over.
But you did that for about like 8 months.
Yeah.
You were the grocery shopper. It was a long time.
I didn't mind, I don't mind doing cooking with the groceries that we have. But the mental load of making sure we have all the stuff we need all the time, a lot heavier than I thought it was.
Thank you for validating that.
You know what? Can I make a comment about all this unpaid labor? Examples you're citing? What's interesting is one of your first statistics in this episode was women on average. I don't know if this was U.S. or world, but it was like 4.5 hours?
Yeah, that was like westernized countries.
Is that per day?
Yes.
Okay, and then men was 2.8, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the argument is not that men don't do unpaid labor. That is not the argument at all, because men on average, 2.8 hours per day, unpaid labor. So guys are doing this stuff too.
Yeah.
Right? I'm doing this stuff too. But it's interesting is that if you compare men and women, I don't know, it's not twice the amount, but maybe like 1.5 times. Like you do 1.5 times statistically the unpaid labor than I do. So it's not that, men aren't doing any of this stuff. Like that's not the argument. Statistically, we are. But it's very disproportional on how much.
And then I think it's interesting to just think about the unpaid labor when it just comes to managing emotions in the home and maintaining harmony.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you have resolving the family disputes and calming tensions, ensuring everyone feels heard during arguments. Usually moms do take on the majority of that responsibility. Listening to your partner's or friend's problems while suppressing your own needs or emotions. Women often do that. You know, remembering birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, organizing gifts.
Oh, you do all that.
Helping children manage tantrums or fears while trying to stay calm yourself. Keeping track of the children's schedules and school needs and social activities. And I just think that so much of that is invisible to people. But it's all necessary to keep a household going.
Yeah, like you don't notice that all that work's being done until it stops being done.
Yeah,
and then you can notice.
These tasks require energy and emotional regulation, but they're often dismissed as just, like I said, natural responsibilities for women.
You know, there's the revolving door. Really, there's revolving door unpaid labor. For example, dishes, always a revolving door. Groceries and cooking, always you're never done. Always a revolving door. That's what I mean, you're never done. Laundry, always a revolving door. As soon as you're done and it goes out, it comes right back in, you have to do it again.
That was a huge eye-opener for me when I realized that those things will never actually be done.
Yeah.
They're just in various states of undone.
Right. For specifically millennials in the U.S., how much do men and women do in unpaid labor per day? So it's still a gap of 41%, even with millennials. Because I was thinking millennial dads are a lot more involved than their previous generations. So I wonder if the gap was narrowing at all. Mm-hmm. But it still looks pretty wide. You know, I was looking at something in one of the links that were cited when I was looking at your citations, and this says that the gap of unpaid labor between women and men will narrow slightly, but by 2050, so 15 years from now, women globally will still be spending 9.5% more time or 2.3 more hours per day on unpaid care work than men. So even at the current trajectory by 2050, it's still not going to be very close to being equivalent.
Right. So I do feel like you do way more than the average guy does when it comes to unpaid labor.
Thank you for that.
What do you think couples can do to help even out this gap?
I'm going to spitball. You can edit out whatever you want to edit out.
Mm-hmm.
You got to like each other, honestly. Because if you like each other and love each other, you're going to want to do things to help each other out, but you're also going to notice, you're doing something disproportional. And just, I think, talking about it. I think if you really like your spouse, you're friends and you love each other, and someone brings up a concern about the burden they're carrying, I think the other person should be open and not just defensive about it. So if a wife comes to a husband about all the, free labor she's doing and she's getting burnt out, I think instead of the guy digging in and say, well, I work all these hours at work and da 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 da. I think just being open and listening and being open to saying, okay, are there some feasible ways that either we can automate or I can take some of these things off your plate that is not like going to bring me past my capacity. You know what I mean? Just not digging in and really listening to the other person about the struggle they're having. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's a big one, talking about it, being receptive. And that goes both ways too. I think that's a big one. I think that it's good to have defined duties explicitly. We've done that for a while.
Yeah, we have done that. We've really fleshed out, like, what are the actual things that have to be done in our household?
Yeah, like on a daily basis. You have multiple kids. Okay, if you don't do bedtimes together, you do this child's bedtime on these days. I do this child's bedtime on these days, and you split it up. Who's packing lunches for school? You divvy that up. Or one person does all of them, and one person does all the breakfasts or something. Just like having it be explicit where there's no guesswork. And there's an actual conversation. Because I wonder how many times there's actually a conversation versus just the wife or mom picking up the tasks, whether there ever really being a conversation as a couple about it.
Yeah, weaponized incompetence is a good thing to bring into this conversation, which is weaponized incompetence is also known as strategic incompetence, and it's a behavior where someone pretends to be incapable of performing a specific task or does it poorly on purpose so that it needs to be corrected, so it's easier just for the other person to do it. And this manipulation tactic is often used to avoid responsibility, and it forces others to take over and perform those tasks instead. So I think that, like, this idea of, like, are these conversations actually happening, or is the woman just picking up the work and the guy just doesn't? I think that is possibly an element of weaponized incompetence too, that is quite the privilege that you can just ignore and trust somebody else is going to pick it up.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a component. I'm sure that's a component. I know that when I have my kids help me with like a construction task, age appropriate, and they're just, I keep having to stop what I'm doing, go help them, come back, go help them again, come back, correct, maybe have to fix something they did. Then it's like, well, it's easier for me just to do it myself.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what it feels like. But then I wonder, like, is it also a matter of, like, for me with the kids, if I can just get through it to where they've actually learned it, as hard as it was for me to have to teach them and fix stuff and blah, 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 but then they're good at it now and they can just do it independently from me. Do you think there's any component of where, like, you have to, if a guy's doing something with weaponized incompetence, or maybe it's not weaponized, maybe it's just incompetence, like, you have to stick with it, with supporting them for a long enough time where they can be independent? Or do you think it ever happens where, like, the person, like the wife is an example in this case, gives up too soon?
I think that can happen. I think a big culprit could be the inability to let go of perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have as women and as people, just in general, often people have a very specific way that they think tasks need to be done or completed, or like, this means the job's done if it's like this. And an example that's coming to mind is there's a woman that I know that her husband did not unload the dishwasher the way that she liked him to unload the dishwasher. And she would always complain that he never unloaded the dishwasher, but then whenever he did it in a way that he did it. And it wasn't necessarily like something crazy, like all the dishes were like in a different place per se, but he didn't, I don't think there was like as much attention to detail as what she wanted it to be. So maybe the drawer wasn't organized the way that she would have preferred it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so she took that as a direct assault on her because he knows how she likes it and he purposely doesn't do it that way. When in reality, I think you've got 4 kids running around in this scenario, like in this certain scenario that I'm talking about. And maybe there's just certain things that are not on your radar as strongly as on your wife's radar. as what is important. Like, is the job done? Did the job get done? And I think in this scenario, the job got done. It just wasn't done to the perfection. I think that you can use that as weaponized incompetence. Men can do that on purpose. But I think that we don't always need to assume that it is on purpose, that there might be other things at play here that is personal preference, or that is what you're talking about. Like, maybe they don't know how, maybe there needs to be extra time spent. I don't know. But again, then that labor falls on an adult woman. When you have an adult man that should be able to, like, we're not talking about a child. We're talking about an adult person.
It's not brain surgery either, what we're doing.
No.
This isn't brain surgery stuff.
No. But I do think that avoiding criticism is important when you're starting to divide these things up. And I think that the conversations need to be framed more as a team effort rather than a competition over who does more. I think that can be a hurdle to having constructive conversations about this stuff.
Yeah.
It's easy to get defensive about who does more.
Right.
And assigning those clear responsibilities is huge. There is a good tool called Eve Rodsky's Fair Play System where you can divide. She has a book, but she also has like a playing deck and some resources where you can divide tasks into categories like household, caregiving, special events, and stuff like that. And then you assign them based on strengths and availability. So it's important to know what your strengths are too.
Yes, we did that.
Yes. And
Not exactly,
we did because we had a list of like, there was things that we called it our ick list of like things that just, I don't like it. I don't like doing it.
Thing.
But there was things on my ick list that you didn't mind. And there was things on your ick list that I didn't mind. And that was a huge relief whenever we just took over each other's ick lists. It increased our quality of life.
Yes. Yeah, that was a big deal. That was great.
Yeah, so making an ick list might be something that would be helpful of like, what are the things that you just like loathe doing because maybe your partner doesn't loathe it to the extreme that you do.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something they loathe more and that you guys can swap.
Yeah. God, that was so freeing when we did that.
A really cool app that you can use too is called Todoist. Obviously, sharing calendars is helpful too to organize tasks and reduce like the mental strain. But Todoist is cool because you can share a to-do list and you can like assign tasks and stuff like that. Or like, let's say you did your task and that was hinging on the next person being able to do theirs. They'll be able to see that you completed your task instead of having to have the constant like verbal communication. You can do it electronically.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's less confrontational. Like someone's checking up on you over your shoulder. Hey, did you do that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's not a very good, at least for me, that's not a very good feeling.
I think by just like implementing strategies like these that couples will start to foster a deeper understanding of what like each other does, and it will reduce resentment and create more of a balanced household dynamic. If you can have these conversations without getting defensive and with being able to let go of perfectionism.
Yeah. I did an interesting exercise. You don't know about this. This is live, everybody. So I asked AI, what are some arguments that men commonly make to refute the notion that women do more unpaid labor than men? Or how do you explain that away? So one is undervaluing men's contributions. Some argue that men's contributions to household maintenance, such as home repairs, yard work, and car maintenance, are often overlooked or undervalued in these statistics. Okay? Which we already cited that men are doing unpaid labor at home. Number two, different standards of cleanliness, which you already brought up, kind of. Is it done to your level? This is interesting. Paid work compensation. Some men claim that their longer hours in paid work compensate for doing less unpaid domestic labor as they contribute more financially to the household. But hey, here's what's interesting about that. Many studies show that when accounting for unpaid care work, women tend to work more hours of total work than men. So if you have unpaid work and paid work for women, unpaid work and paid work for men, women still work more. So you can say, yeah, we're not taking into account the financial contribution for paid work that men are doing. But if you add up paid work hours and unpaid hours for men, And same for women. Women are still working more. Isn't that crazy? That blew me away.
Yeah, that's
a big
good
argument.
information
Well,
to know.
I work more hours at work and I make more money to bring it home and I work all day and da-da-da. But statistically, at the end of the day, it seems to point to women still work more hours. If we're talking total work versus just unpaid work.
Right.
It's an interesting distinction to make.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then there's other arguments that are made like personal choice, cultural norms, and things like that. But none of these arguments, if you notice, really refute that women work more unpaid labor. It's, here's why. Or here's maybe what's not taken into account for men's unpaid work. But none of these arguments are refuting the data and the facts that women do more unpaid work hours.
Yeah.
But that blew me away. The total work.
Yeah.
For unpaid and paid combined, women work more hours than men.
I guess that does not shock me at the level that it shocked you.
I don't think I've ever thought it before. Like, I've known that's a common trope. Like, I do more work hours that are paid. That's why I'm not doing as much at home, because you're not working as many paid hours as I am. So of course you're going to do more work at home. Which to me, that argument, yeah, that makes sense. But it doesn't mean that women aren't doing more total hours of work. And that is the discrepancy that couples should be talking about. Not if you work more hours outside the home, of course, whether that's the man or the woman, if you work less hours outside the home, you should be doing more of the hours in the home than the person who's gone. But the total work hours should still be comparable to each other. That's my opinion. Man or woman, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Stay-at-home dad, he should be doing more of the homework than the mom who works outside the home. But total work hours should be comparable.
And I think that if you are a couple that, you have decided to build a life together and you've decided to have a family together, like, no one's getting time, like guys, you're not getting time off, okay? This is a 24/7 job. This is what you signed up for. It doesn't matter how many hours you work outside the home, like, you have a home. And so that means that it's 24/7. You have a family. Yeah. That means it's 24/7.
And you know what? You know what's not taken into account here either? So it's not just looking at the hours men are working at home and the hours women are working at home. And it's not even about total hours, which to me is a big deal to look at that distinction. But it's also, what is the energy or mental or emotional tax? For example, at night, if there's a kid who is sick and needs help in the middle of the night, who are they waking up, you or me?
Me.
You. So then, yes, you getting up and doing all of those things adds to your unpaid labor hours, right? And your total hours. But there's also the aspect of now your sleep is diminished. And maybe you can't fall back asleep quickly because you're worried about how they're doing or what they might have. And maybe you Google some things, as an example. Maybe you Amazon some things. So now you have less sleep. So you're operating at an energy deficit and potentially an emotional or mental deficit the next day with how much it affects your sleep. So then you're going to have more hours, total hours, than your counterpart, but then you also have this emotional or mental or just sleep and energy deficit you're running at in addition to the increased hours that you're doing. And that's just an example, of one that could affect you in a non just numerical number of hours way.
What I find interesting is that how much the fact that we live in a capitalistic society is what makes this unpaid versus paid labor even a thing. Like, labor is labor, whether you're getting paid for it, whether you're not. But yet it seems like we value paid labor outside the home higher than unpaid labor, even though labor is labor.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree with that. That's interesting. Huh. Because if we just look at labor overall, I don't know why. It feels like, oh, yeah, well, duh. Statistically, wives work more hours than husbands.
Exactly.
Okay, that's an issue that should probably be fixed. Versus, well, he works more paid hours. And those are somehow weighted differently than unpaid hours.
Exactly. It's like they're weighted.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was a great conversation. I really appreciated it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope that you guys got something out of it. I know this was a lighter one. We've had some heavy ones, and so we wanted to throw in a more lighter one that is also practical and something that you can apply to your life and apply to your relationships, and hopefully open some eyes to some guys maybe that are listening that haven't considered before the unpaid labor versus paid labor debate, and really open your eyes to the amount of work that goes behind things. Even something as simple as grocery shopping isn't just grocery shopping. It's being the inventory clerk. It's paying, that mental labor that goes into it behind the scenes.
Yeah. And it's about the well-being of everybody. And you don't want your partner's well-being to be affected with things that don't necessarily have to be.
Yeah. And I highly recommend an ick list. It made a huge difference for us.
It totally did. You can't stand doing the dishes because it just feels icky, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't mind doing dishes. I don't particularly love it, but I don't mind it. For you, it's like a loathing.
Yeah. And I don't mind doing laundry as much as you mind doing laundry.
Yeah. I really don't like doing laundry. Yeah. I really don't like it.
Yeah. Now, does that mean that I never do dishes? That doesn't mean I never do dishes. But he knows that that's like that if he can do the dishes, that how much of a burden that is relieved because of how much I ick it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we even traded different kids who puts who to bed because there seems to be like a better, smoother bedtime routine that you have with one kid that I don't, and that I have with one kid that you don't. You know what I mean? Like one is more
so the
troubling for each
majority
of us.
of the days of the week, you put to bed one kid, I put to bed the other kid, and then on weekends we swap so that there's not like just completely not the other parent involved in that.
Yeah.
But it does go more smoothly for us to divide it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that was a really big game changer for us in a positive way.
Yeah. The bedtimes and the nap time divisions were helpful. Thanks for joining us for another episode.
Yes. Thank you so much. It's fun for me to talk about and to learn at the same time, and have that male voice be, something that's helpful.
Give us some we're always open to feedback, so you can
Please.
definitely give us feedback. And if you have any recommendations on things you would like us to talk about, you can always email us at pinkpillrx@gmail.com.
I hope for those of you listening, something was intriguing or sparked a curiosity, or you felt affirmed or challenged. Stay educated. Take the pink pill. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a follow and maybe a nice review.